Hi, Lee Balcom here. I just wanted to record this video very quickly because I've just finished talking with several couples, and I realized that what had happened was they had done several things. In fact, one or two of the people had done several things that had actually gotten in the way of their efforts to save their marriage, and I don't want you to make the same mistake. So I wanted to put together some material very quickly to get you some ideas on how to avoid getting yourself further into trouble in a marriage crisis. First of all, I don't know if you know the statistic, but each year 1.1 million marriages end in divorce. In other words, half of marriages, we get about 2.2 million marriages that start in the U.S., and the number that ends is half of that. The question is, will you be able to beat the statistic? And I'm going to show you some ways of not getting yourself further into trouble. Sometimes we are in the effort of trying to save our marriage, and we don't even think about what we need to do or not do when we're trying to save our marriage, because if our marriage is having problems, and if we're fearful of being headed for divorce, and if we feel stuck, sometimes we begin to take actions that actually cause more trouble. So we're going to get this going so that you can have some things straight off the bat that you can apply today, right now, in order to avoid getting into these traps that keep the marriage from getting out of trouble. Sometimes we do some things, some actions, inactions that can actually make the situation worse unless we know what to avoid. You need to know what to avoid so you don't have to get into trouble before you start working on how to fix your marriage. Let's get started right off the bat. The first don't is don't refuse to face reality. One of the biggest things I see is people just kind of floating around as if nothing's happening, and my comparison is watching people get into financial trouble. They don't even notice as their debt goes up and up and up. They refuse to notice that their habits of spending are out of control. It's the same with their marriage. Sometimes we refuse to face the reality of what's really going on. All the time, our initial reaction is to avoid reality. That's why we call it denial. But once we get through that denial, the question is how quickly we get through that denial. You see, sometimes not facing reality has been the problem for years. I've seen people who have had spouses who have been talking to them in very mean ways for years and years, and the spouse was never even aware of what they were doing. They've been part of the problem of not facing the reality of what's taking apart their marriage for so long that they find themselves in trouble and suddenly can't figure out how to get out of trouble. And here's the thing. Little problems can become big problems if we refuse to look at them. I don't know how many times I've looked at a couple and said, man, I wish you had come a year ago, or 6 months ago, or 6 weeks ago, before this turned into a snowball that was so huge that I didn't know if I could turn it around. It's time to assess the situation. It's time to sit back and say, what's really going on? What's my role? What has been here for a long time? What are the patterns that we need to be looking for? In other words, it's time to face reality and see where you're going. You're likely watching this video because you're beginning to face reality and you're beginning to think that something might need to change. Continue doing that. Continue to assess the situation. Don't be going through this as if nothing's going on and kind of hiding your eyes from the whole situation. The second don't do is don't do nothing. In other words, don't be frozen. Don't just get stuck. Sometimes when we're overwhelmed, we just find ourselves completely paralyzed and we can't get ourselves moving. Sometimes when we think so much about the situation, we find lots of different possibilities and we exhaust ourselves thinking about all the possibilities and we never take action. This is called analysis paralysis, or paralysis by analysis. You're working so hard to figure things out that nothing ever gets done. Don't fall for that. Don't get stuck in the pattern of do nothing so that you end up completely frozen in inactivity. The second part, just the opposite. Don't do everything. Sometimes it's very tempting to go out and grab all those books, grab all the advice and all the seminars, and you end up scattering in about 15 different directions all at the same time. You find yourself completely locked into reading book after book after book. You listen to advice after advice after advice. You find all these resources, and you start trying to apply them all at once. Don't do that. Pick out the best advice you can and apply that advice. If you find the best advice, you can bet that it's out there and it's been there for a while for one reason. It works. Otherwise, it wouldn't still be there. So stick with some piece of advice, work on it hard, and see if you can make some dent in what's going on. Now let's get into a couple other practicalities of don't. Don't tell everyone. One of the tendencies we have is when we're in the midst of a crisis, we want to tell everyone around us of what's happened because we want them to give us support. The problem is, when we start telling everybody what happens, when we get back together, there's a whole community that's looking at you as a broken relationship. That backfires and it makes it very difficult. Think about your family. If just your family knew, all your family knew about what's been going on, whose side are they likely to choose? They're likely to choose your side against your spouse. And suddenly you fix things in your marriage, you say, hey, everything's okay, and they still feel some resentment towards your spouse. So you have to be very careful. Don't go to the mountaintop and tell everybody what's going on. You may find yourself getting some support, but overwhelmed with what happens on the back end. The opposite of that, don't tell no one. In other words, don't isolate yourself, because you do need support and you do need care in the midst of a crisis, and you need to find out how to do that. But do that by finding one or two close friends that can support you. And one of the things I would say is you want to make sure that they will support you regardless of what happens in the outcome. They'll support you, they'll support the relationship, they'll support your spouse on the back end when you decide, when and if you decide to get back together and work it out. They're able to hold that in place because they really are true friends. So let's go through this again. First of all, don't refuse to face reality. Second, don't get yourself paralyzed. In other words, don't do nothing. Third, don't do the opposite of that, which is to do everything. Fourth, don't tell everyone. Fifth, don't tell no one. If you do these things, you're going to increase the capacity of being able to put things back together because you're learning what not to do. Now, if you want to know more about what not to do, I have a very special report that you can get access to. If you go to www.savethemarriage.com, you'll find a special report that you can access there about the 5 things not to do. And these are not those 5 things. I've got a whole nother, it's my top 5 things of what not to do. There are a couple that are similar, but there are some others that you need to know about. There's also a quick start guide there on how to immediately jump in within 10-15 minutes, begin to save your marriage. There's an ebook there to give you advice on how to rebuild your relationship. So if you want to learn more about what not to do and what to do, go now, right now, go to www.savethemarriage.com.